What's up, everybody? This is Fred Richani. In this interview, we chat with director Nicola Rose of the critically acclaimed film Goodbye, Petrushka.
She's a bit of an oddball, a dreamer.
You need to go to Paris.
And a romantic.
Excuse me, you dropped this receipt from babysitting Paris?
Oh my God, Claire, you love him.
But in her dream city of Paris, nothing goes as planned. Whether she's battling bureaucrats,
Qui? Pourquoi?
Non, madame.
nannying for the Parisian family from hell,
I'm Nadège Saint-Pierre. This is my mother, Katia.
Are you depressed, Claire?
Elodie and Angélique.
or falling in love.
Je vais nous inscrire au festival. Aide-moi.
Twice.
Do you have a boyfriend?
Claire's stint in Paris is filled with faux pas.
Mademoiselle, yes, you, the puppet person, we will let our children run around and scream.
And just a bit of magic.
Life is far too short, and true passion is far too rare.
So you'll be Petrushka for me?
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, Goodbye, Petrushka is not your normal romantic comedy. This is kind of a drama as well. It involves a lot of different humor. Critically acclaimed for good reason. At the time we are recording this right now, 100% Rotten Tomatoes score amongst critics and fans alike, which is pretty incredible. So I just got to ask you first, now that we just saw the trailer, how'd you come up with this whole concept of going back and forth between New York and France and a puppeteer that's looking for love and just looking for a purpose?
Well, just like us all, aren't we all puppeteers looking for love when you come down to it? No, obviously we're not. But you know what? The concept was pretty close to me. I did used to be a professional puppeteer. So this is a real case of writing what you know. Very, very deliberate case of. There is something really, really absurd about the career of being like a traveling puppeteer, going around to, libraries, daycares, public schools, private schools, pretty much anywhere they will let you perform, anywhere that has children in it. It can be a really rewarding career. I mean, laughs from kids have to be earned. They really it means something when you get those laughs. It's not pity laughs. It's not, oh, ha, 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 I'm laughing because it's social laughter and I have to, but they really, those belly laughs are like, you've earned that. On the other hand, it is an extremely grueling job. It is really hard. I actually burned out of it at age 29, feeling that I could not do the running around anymore. So I now direct films, which allows me to be in a sedentary position some of the time. So suits me. What I was going to say, though, is that Goodbye, Petrushka was based on when I did my, is a little too, I'm saying this a little too loosely, perhaps, but I did study puppetry in Paris. I did live in Paris as an expat for a couple years. And during that time, I knew so many people who were just so much larger than life, fellow expats who were there, people who lived there that I was friends with. And there was just so much that I said to myself, oh my God, this is already literally a sitcom. This is something. This is, some of the dialogue just wrote itself. Absurd things my friends would say. I'm like, God, if I wrote this down, somebody would say, oh, this is too absurd. This is not real. Where do you get your ideas?
That's funny. And as far as figure skating, do you know any actual figure skaters?
Yes. So the premise of a puppeteer who falls for a figure skater is true. Fun fact. So there was a figure skater that I did become friends with, my teenage years crush and one of my idols who did used to figure skate for France. And I would watch him do what he did, and his performances were extraordinary. And I did eventually, I did not, as the protagonist, I feel like I have to explain this to people, that I did not actually follow my, I didn't actually go all groupie and follow somebody to France. I lived in France at the time, but this guy was a really talented figure skater who did retire from his competitive career. At a certain point, they retire early, like gymnasts and dancers. Their bodies don't, really allow them to go past age, like, I don't know, 25, if you're lucky. And so he and I did talk about doing a project together that would, as strange as this sounds in the film, they're like, where did you get this wacky idea? They're going to do a show combining puppets and figure skating. Well, that was actually his idea. That did happen. He wanted to do something. It didn't materialize. It didn't come to life, but that is also part of the story now, is how did it not come to life? Why did it not come to life? And honestly, anything in the story that is well plotted and well thought out and goes from point A to point B and has development and conflict and resolution is a total lie. It did not happen in real life. That's me doing a good job of distorting things.
You did a heck of a job with the film, but I did notice, of course, it takes place in New York City and also in Paris. So did you actually shoot some of the scenes on location in Paris?
No, we filmed during COVID. So at the time that we filmed it, I think by that time we actually, COVID wise, people could go back and forth between the countries. That wasn't so much an issue. But prior to that, when we were actually doing the pre-production, the planning of the film, that was not something we could plan. We couldn't say, oh, well, we'll go to Paris, at this time. Forget it. It wasn't something we could plan to do. So my producing partner, Tierney Boorboor, and I just sort of said to ourselves at some point, look, we have to make this game time decision. And we shot everything in New York. It really looks, unless you happen to know what the walls of Trinity Cemetery in Harlem look like, and there are people that do, they'll say, but generally speaking, you don't, you really don't know where you are, because it's shot in such a way, the angles and the widths are such a way, you really don't know where you are unless you need to. So the parts that are in New York, all of a sudden there are mystifyingly a lot more wide shots, and the stuff that's in Paris, it's a lot more close up. But there's also a certain amount of drone footage of Paris that just does enough, I think, to convey the idea, oh, look where we are, and then you don't really question it again unless you watch this interview.
That is true. I appreciate you peeling back the curtain a little bit, but no, they did an awesome job kind of blending them together. I didn't know. That's why I asked the question. So that's
nobody know. I mean, there are very few people who know. There was one reviewer who had come to see our Q&A and heard me talk about it and talked a lot about it in her review, and it was a gorgeous review. But I was like, oh, darn it, if I hadn't talked about it, it's all right. It's really a very open secret. At this point, it is not a secret.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And you mentioned that you filmed this during the pandemic, which obviously was super chaotic for people, still going on, obviously. But, there's vaccines now and things like that. There's more travel at the time. I'm sure that you were filming, casting, this whole deal. Not so much. So how was the casting process for you? Was it tough to get people in the room for auditions or go through self-tapes in the midst of, trying to stay healthy and all that jazz? Or did it kind of all come together once you really had a vision?
So both things are true. Actually, we did have a fair amount of travel. Well, essentially, we didn't get anybody in the room. It was all through Zoom. It was all through, FaceTime and people's agents or people themselves that would submit their self tapes. And, we said, I'd love to do a callback with you via Zoom. And I remember just being at my computer for 2 days worth of callbacks, initial callbacks. And then, of course, there was way more. There was chemistry reads and all of that. And these people came through, and I remember just sitting there audition after audition after audition, and back to back. And I was reading the part of Thibaut. I was reading in French and English, all this stuff, and sitting in front of my computer and being like, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not even having to exert any energy. Why am I tired? But it was a lot. I mean, bless those actors. They had to do the real work, but I was sitting there being the reader all day. And it's just, it's the pandemic. I was acting as casting director on this, not because of the limited budget, but because I actually am a CD. I have been a CD for a number of years. And although it's not my primary professional thing, it's not the thing I go around giving out cards for. It is a skill I have. It is professional background I have. So, it's something where I trust myself a lot more than, say, if you handed me a camera, which you don't want to do. So the business of casting it actually did come together in a very sort of coherent way, mostly because it became clear fairly quick. Some roles were harder to cast than others in this movie, but it became clear fairly quickly who was right for what, or if there was a real embarrassment of choice for something, which did happen on more than one occasion.
How was the whole distribution process for you as far as, selling the film, getting the rights acquired by different companies to put it on these major platforms? By the way, you could get it not only on Tubi, but on YouTube, Google Play, and Amazon Prime. So yeah, I would love it if you could just kind of give us a little insight on that whole process, because we see the finished product, but we don't see all the kind of dirty work that goes behind the scenes.
Yes. So a lot of the dirty work, the credit for the dirty work goes to our distributor, Indie Rights Movies, who are awesome. And they're out in LA doing that for us. They're the ones who got it onto Amazon Prime. They're the ones who got it onto Tubi and onto Google Play and onto YouTube and anywhere else that it is right now. They got it there. That's their job. And they do it really well. What was I going to say about that? And then in the interim, of course, between the time that the movie was finished and the time that the movie was distributed, it had its world premiere at Dances with Films in LA, which is a big festival, gorgeous festival, that really has a very specific mission of bringing to light, into the spotlight, films that are truly indie, because indie is a word that gets bandied about a lot. You can say there are people that say, I'm not necessarily decrying this, but I have thoughts about it. There are people who say, well, this is an indie film and it's a $15 million film with major stars and backing. And, that is not an indie film in the sense that it may be an indie film in the sense that indie is short for independent. And yes, this is being done by really independent rich people. But this is not the same as an indie film that cost $300,000 or even $500,000 and is being done. And, possibly that's made up of investments of $50,000 or $25,000 a piece or $2,500. We don't know. That's the thing. There's indie with it. There's levels and gradations of indie within indie. And it isn't something that just anybody can do. It is really, really hard. You have to have access to people with money. And there are so many talented people out there who don't have access to funds. And it is not an equitable situation. It is not fair. So I have to say that. But we did manage all the same.
So would you say the overall kind of distribution process and just really just getting your work out there is still a lot of work, but it is a lot easier now than when you first got into the business?
When I first got into the business, so I say this as if, this is so long ago. I've been doing this for about 7 years, I think. So not so very long ago. And when I started doing this, I was paying people $25 a day out of my own pocket to do a web series with me that had to do with an evil puppet. And I was acting in the web series too. So there's all sorts that was going on there that I wouldn't necessarily advise. Chiefly my acting in it, because I'm way more comfortable now being behind the camera. But back in those days, what has changed since then is largely what has changed for me. It's what do I have access to? And for that, I really have my producing partner, Tierney, whom I mentioned earlier, Tierney Boorboor, and her producing partners at Cufflink Productions and at Balmain Teen Media and at Irrational Productions. So all our co-producers and executive producers. I have them to thank for that. And these are just the people you are lucky to run into along the way. Friends of friends of friends,
Definitely. So. And in terms of, we mentioned before, you've been an actor before, you've been a puppeteer, you're currently a casting director, obviously mainly a filmmaker these days, but how did it all start for you? When Nicola was growing up, what led you to this odyssey of showbiz?
Oh gosh, I went to theater summer camp because my friend was going to theater summer camp and I wanted to go. And I ended up on stage doing community theater plays. I ended up, which I don't recommend, by the way. And I ended up doing, I just don't think this is anything that anybody needs to do. I think it adds very, very little to the world, but that's another matter. Anyway, I had a blast performing. I did have a blast performing. And so that was what I grew up thinking I was going to do. I thought I would be performing. I continued performing, including the puppetry stuff and all of that, which is what I had the most success doing, because there just aren't a lot of puppeteers out there. All of us, up until then, it was, well, you are this 20-something white girl trying to be an actress. And I just think, well, gosh, there's nobody in that field. And then, nobody really wanted to cast me because it was like, yeah, but you're also like, I don't know, like you look a certain way, but you talk a certain way, but you're not like other people, but I don't know, you're just like weird. And it's just a tedious process. And I became a puppeteer, and all of a sudden it was, oh, you're so fun and quirky. Have you tried acting? And damned if you do it, damned if you don't. Anyway, I ended up at some point burning out on the puppetry, but I still have this huge respect and love for puppetry as an art form, especially the way they do it in Europe, in Asia, in countries like the Czech Republic, where it's a huge, like long tradition that goes back hundreds of years. It's just such a deep art form. It's been around so long. Object theater is a thing that's been around since cavemen, going around the fire using sticks to tell about their day. This is what I did at work today. It's a hell of an art, and it's really, really hard. And I just have the utmost respect for people who can get up there every day and expend so much energy. The puppeteers refer to it as wiggling dollies, which is they say this is what we do. We wiggle dollies. Sesame Street puppeteers and any other kind of puppeteer who is not necessarily making a ton of money doing it, but who is doing their damnedest.
Shout out to the puppeteers.
Hey.
and you mentioned how these people try to put you in the box when you're trying acting and just getting into showbiz, and we have enough of this, but all of a sudden, like, they see you as quirky and this and that. I feel like in showbiz and media, they always try to put people in a box. There's a lot of gatekeeping is a word that's been used as well. As a female filmmaker, have you dealt with a lot of sexism and just overall gatekeeping and BS? And just for anybody watching and listening to this that's looking to maybe be a filmmaker or do anything in showbiz, what advice would you give them to kind of overcome all that crap?
I would say try to focus only on your core of self-confidence and shut out absolutely everything else. This is especially true when you're on set. You have to not question anything that you are thinking, because once you start getting outside of that, and once you start thinking, do I really mean what I'm saying? Should I really be doing this way? Am I really doing good enough? That is not the time. This is wasted energy, and it will bring you down. What you have to do is know that you have trained well, you have prepared well. Everything that you have done has driven you toward this moment. Now you're here. Now you have to do your best, and you will do your best. And everything else is just kind of, it's up to chance. There are things you can't control. I have a lot of trouble with that, by the way. I don't like not controlling things. But as far as sexism, there is a certain, there's always a little undercurrent of Me Too moments that are jolly fun, and you get past them and grit your teeth, and I don't like them, and they happen. But I've been relatively lucky, relatively spared, just lucky. And then there is something that happens that has to do. It's not loud sexism. It's very quiet sexism. It's more the omission of respect, and you don't even realize it's happening until you realize I have been standing here saying the same thing I need to happen for 5 minutes too long, and still nobody has heard me because they're still talking to each other. And if my voice were an octave lower right now, if I were able to say it down here, you guys would all be hearing me. And it's like a dog whistle thing. That, it needs to be at a certain pitch and said a certain way that involves the word man at the end for it to be heard. And, I am not in some ways an especially commanding person. I just do things the way I do them. I can be very aggressive, but I don't think I'm like fearsome in any way. I don't think anybody would say that and to say, oh, she's nice, she's so sweet. But after a while I remember one time on a set repeating very politely 5 times when I needed, and then finally, because time was running out, I yelled it. And I don't feel good yelling at people. I do not feel good yelling at people. It is very rare that I yell at people, but I did. And then I remember that the two men I was yelling at turned around and one of them said, well, you don't have to scream. And it's one of those moments where, is this an attack? Is this an assault? No, obviously not. When we call that an attack or an assault, we do injustice to things that are actual attacks and assaults. And actually, this is just a major inconvenience and it's stupid and people should not be asked. But I think the moral of this story is maybe respect other people. That is what I'm coming down to.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think when people say, like, oh, take it easy, you don't have to yell. It's like,
scream is an interesting word when you're not screaming.
On a lighter note, of course, people can check out Goodbye Petrushka. We'll say it again on Tubi with ads, or you can check it out on Amazon Prime Video, YouTube, and Google Play. Nicola, you've been so gracious with your time.
Thank you.
We always like to ask all our guests some kind of random and rapid fire questions just to get to know them better. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Favorite late night snack or cheat meal?
Ooh, smart food popcorn.
All right. All-time favorite actors and filmmakers?
All-time favorite filmmakers are Wes Anderson, Jean-Pierre Jeunet, and Céline Sciamma. And then what was the other question?
And all-time favorite actors and actresses, like any particular ones you want to shout out.
So all-time favorite actress would be Audrey Tautou. I know I've mentioned Amélie twice here. All-time favorite all-time favorite actors would be the cast of Whose Line Is It Anyway?
I love that. I love that show growing up. That was awesome. Yeah, it's still a good show. Great.
It is. It's still on.
What was your most awkward moment in filming Goodbye Petrushka?
Oh goodness. I was having a hand disorder. Nobody ever really figured out what was going on. I had some sort of semi-arthritic problem with my thumbs. I don't know, but I would be going around sometimes having to direct scenes and just having this incredible pain in my hands, which has since really let up, and nobody knows why that either. Like my hand doctors don't. Anyway, so I would be going around set saying to my wonderful AD, Brett By, I would be saying, can you press a button on my iPad because I really can't breathe? Or just, feeling like this old person falling apart. So it was certainly awkward, but, possibly nothing was more awkward than directing a little girl to spit in an actress's face and saying to them both, it's got to be this way. You got to really do it. And my God, they pulled it off beautifully. You see it in the trailer.
That sounds like a severe case of carpal tunnel.
Yeah, I don't know what was going on. I still don't really, carpal tunnel. It could be repeated motions that I'm not a gamer. I'm not I'm not an overuser of thumbs on my phone. So God knows.
Yeah. Well, glad you got through that.
I'm sure it's not fascinating, actually.
There's a couple cringe characters in a good way that provide a lot of comic relief in your film. One is Rafal, who, I don't know, he's like the most oblivious man on earth. And the other is Julia, who, I mean, listen, I'm a germaphobe, but she takes it to a whole another level. Who is more cringe in your opinion, Rafal or Julia? And have you met people in real life like these two?
They're both real people. They're both absolutely real people. Julia is literally, it's Rafal that's more cringe. There's no question. It's Julia is the one that's based almost literally on my best friend when I was in grad school. I wasn't kidding when I said that was a time that was so surreal. I felt I was living in the theater of the absurd. And that was my that was my best friend, and she really did this is something that happens in the movie. She really did sit down and explain sex to me. I was a late bloomer, but I wouldn't say incredibly wide-eyed. I didn't really need this explanation, but it was this fairly ostentatious explanation in the middle of a deli, and it's a kosher deli in the Jewish neighborhood in Paris. And we were sitting there and she was explaining to me in the loudest whisper you could ever imagine why you shouldn't have sex, because sex, when you come down to it, is unsanitary. And I was sitting there thinking, I don't think what she's saying makes sense. And, with my limited knowledge of the subject, I was still like, I don't think this makes sense. And but the dialogue was so it was so otherworldly. It was so damned weird. I just knew it was going to make its way into the script, and it did. And there it is. And there is very little about that scene that, I mean, yes, cringy, yes, but not to herself. Whereas, Rafal, I think I think he even upsets himself, clearly in the end.
Yeah, he is lacking in certain social cues, to say the least, but it makes for an entertaining watch for sure.
And it's so interesting because always with actors who are playing really problematic characters, or sociopaths, narcissists, things like that, I always say the ones who play those best are the ones that are empaths, the ones that are the absolute opposite of the character they're playing. And Bartek Szymanski, who plays Rafal in the movie, is this wonderfully kind, empathetic, soft-spoken, almost sort of shy person who, like, if you meet him, you don't actually realize that's. I've had people meet him and then be like, was that the guy who, they don't actually realize it was the same person. And I think it really because if you actually are, a deeply problematic person of that sort, you're not going to be able to portray it with any verisimilitude at all. You're just not going to be able to. It's interesting because we got any number of tapes for that role and for Professor Steve, who, is this comic role at the beginning of the film, people who took the roles completely seriously and who didn't see the exaggerations in them. And that was a really bad sign, because here you get these tapes of people who just think, well, this is completely normal what they're saying. You're like, oh my God, this is a litmus test for sociopathy. These self tapes. I am no psychiatrist, but you say to yourself. Anyway, it's interesting. And yes, he's the ultimate cringy character. Bartek himself was saying, I was kind of like shrinking down in my seat. I was watching.
Hey, well, shout out to him. He did a great job. And yeah, it's so true. I interviewed Jasper Cole recently, who's like literally almost every role he's ever had in Hollywood has been like some kind of tool bag. But like you meet him and he's like the sweetest guy. And usually the people that play the bad guys say like, it's something different. And then also I think because they are nice people, that they know what is rude and what's not rude, so they can project that, like you said, as opposed to somebody that maybe is not really self-aware, and then they just think it's, this is
normal. Of course.
Yeah.
Well, you do. I think you have to be really astute as an observer of humanity in order to play good or bad people, but especially, and bad is very reductive here. This is not necessarily a bad person. I even think he has some sympathetic qualities, although some people disagree with me. My mother cannot stand that character. It's just like, he has no redeeming qualities. I understand that, but I slightly disagree. I think he's got his moments where you actually think he has a point, even if you don't want to agree with it. But anyway, long story very short, I think you cannot be entirely stuck on yourself. There's a certain amount of egotism or egoism, whatever you want to call it, that actually is necessary to be a good actor, because your vessel is your instrument is yourself. You are the vessel through which the character, But I also think it's really, really, really important to have your view turned outward, or else you come off as a person who has never observed another person. Yeah. And that's really problematic. And I notice a lot of that. Here I go, tarring a lot with the same brush, and I shouldn't, and I'm not, but it's going to sound like it. I notice this coming a lot from acting coaches who tend to it is a thing that happens that you meet certain actors who have been coached by certain coaches, and they've been coached to behave in a way that resembles a person who has never actually seen another human being act. I don't mean act on stage. I mean like commit an activity.
Right.
And I've never understood that. I've never understood how these people stay in business. I've never understood why they can be so blatantly fraudulent and still doing what they're doing. I am not speaking of all acting coaches here. I am speaking of a trend I have seen, and especially toward child actors who come at you acting like an adult's imitation of a child acting like an adult thinks a child thinks, if that adult has never met an actual human child. My word to those people is stop it.
And hey, that's good acting advice too for anybody watching and listening. Now, you've also of course, acted, you've done casting, you puppeteering, you name it, you've got so many job titles we can't even keep up. All very impressive. What would you say is the hardest job title that you've had in the film industry?
Editing. Because, editing is where you have the chance to obtain the most gratification, but that can go the other way too. And sometimes you think you've done an excellent job, and what you see before your swimming eyes after hours and hours at the monitor tells you you've done an excellent job, but you see it later and you realize you actually hit wide of the mark. It doesn't matter how many people you've run it by, it is still possible to just kind of be off base with what you've. So I would say, editing when you hit the mark is as gratifying as things can be. There are very few things more so, but it can also be kind of, it's elusive. Like good results could be really elusive. So I'm really proud of the things that I do well when I'm editing a movie. And there are other things that I look at every time I do something and I say, here's where I'm going to do something different. I'm going to take a different path next time. So ongoing, but then they're all, directing is hard. I don't really think about it, but like directing is hard. Writing is hard, although you have so many chances to get that right. Everything's hard. You just have to each time do better.
Now, you've already dropped a lot of gems in this interview that we really do appreciate, but what's the best piece of advice you give for success?
Don't think too hard about yourself. That's
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I can elaborate on that. It's the same advice really that I was talking about for actors, which is if you look outward, if you look at what you intend to do rather than who you intend to be and how am I doing at this moment and what have I accomplished and what is my internal state, all of those things that I just said are ways to sort of run aground and ways to sort of not move forward, ways to sort of stay stalled, stay in neutral. But if you're looking outward, if you're looking at all the things you can make, all the things that you can do, all the things that you want to have accomplished by a certain time, I think if you can sort of see the future in front of you, I think you have a much better chance of achieving that future. So stand outside yourself when you can. And then when you get on set, go completely inside your head and don't leave.
Why should people watch Goodbye, Petrushka?
It seems that everybody, I swear to God, everybody I've spoken to has had an experience of growing up and screwing up, which is, part of the movie's tagline, growing up and screwing up in two countries. And I think everybody remembers that time in their life when things were so vivid and so deeply felt, and you were yearning like crazy for something, even if you didn't quite know what. And I think that time is still emotionally present for a lot of people. I think it's kind of like, they're early adolescence, which is not the time portrayed in Goodbye, Petrushka. Like this is later, but I think to some extent, like say you're 11 years old, you're 12 years old, you form some things that, some very sort of crucial things about yourself, likes, dislikes, identity. You kind of never stop being 11 years old in some way. That stays with you. But then later on, you're 19 years old. And that's the time of all that deeply emotional yearning and all these needs and where all these things get, they become concrete. You start fulfilling some of the dreams or you really bite the big one and don't fulfill any of them. Either way, it is such a vivid time and it stays with people. And the number one thing, other than that people are relieved by the ending, the number one thing I've heard is I identified so much. And it's like, it's not who you'd think. It's like 70-year-old men. It's guys in their 40s. It's women who, much older women, or sometimes it's like, I've heard from 11-year-olds also. I've heard from, it's not necessarily the sort of 18 to 34, chick demographic that, somebody might try to sort of impose on that film. I think everybody has been Claire at some point or another, Claire is the protagonist for those who, I think everybody's been that character at some point or another, and it really is hitting a nerve. Like if you look at our reviews on Amazon, and I swear I do not know these people. I know some of them, but I don't know most of them. Just the impact that this teeny little, rather silly film has had on people is really kind of heartrending for me. And I mean that in the best way. People are really identifying with it. I'm not even sure why. I just put down on paper what I thought was important. And that seems to be the way to go, I guess.
You did a great job. Goodbye, Petrushka. You can check it out now on Tubi, on YouTube, Google Play, Amazon Prime Video. Absolutely fantastic work from you, Nicola, and the cast and crew involved. Just well deserved. 100% right now, currently on Rotten Tomatoes, which is awesome. Audience score and critic score.
Yes.
Bonus question. Is there anything you wish I asked you in this interview?
There is not. There is not. I'll think of it later if there is. I'll think of it tonight, wake up at 2 a.m. No, I think we're good. I think you did an excellent job interviewing, and may I just say, back at you. Great job.
Thank you. That's much appreciated. Although if I do get a random message from on IG in all caps at 3 a.m., I'll reply. Like, I forgot to ask you about my favorite animal. I'm like, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's the dingo.
Okay.
Okay, well, now we covered it.
There we go. Now we covered it. Excellent. Well, before we let you go, Nicola, where can we find you online, and where can we find you next?
Oh, yes. So my online presence, well, the film's online presence is really the important one. So at Goodbye Petrushka Film, I'm going to assume people know how to spell Petrushka from whatever accompanies this. Goodbye Petrushka Film on Instagram and on TikTok and on Facebook. It's all Goodbye Petrushka Film. And then I have an Instagram people can follow it, Nicola Rose MCE. It's Nicola Rose MEC-E. But the film is the important one. It's all followable. I do not mind. Go ahead, follow me. Basically, you're going to see the same content about Goodbye Petrushka anyway. It's what I do. And then what was your other?
Where can we find you next? Any upcoming events? Any other projects you're allowed to talk about, or anything that's coming up?
Yeah, I have another feature film in development, and we don't know exactly when more is going to be sayable about it, but its name is Magnetosphere, and so now I have two films that you can say to people, and they say, "What?" It's kind of fun, but it always gets a conversation going. If your film is called like Bob, okay, that's called Bob. Great. If your film is called Goodbye Petrushka or Magnetosphere, they either say, "Are you Russian?" or they say, "What?" So those are all good icebreakers. Oh yeah, Magnetosphere has to do with a 13-year-old girl who is neurodivergent, and it's written. It's it's in the process of being peopled, getting the team together.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely be on the lookout for that. Nicola, thank you so much for your time. Again, Goodbye Petrushka, available right now on Tubi.